A few months ago, I imagined a moment many Americans dream about: opening an email that finally confirms a six-figure salary milestone. The number reads $100,000, and for a brief second, it feels like crossing an invisible finish line. For decades in America, earning six figures meant stability, comfort, and the sense that financial stress might finally fade away. Yet something strange happens after that moment, because the celebration fades quickly, and everyday expenses begin to feel heavier. Rent still arrives every month. Groceries still climb in price, and the bank balance never grows the way people expect. Over the past few years, I have spoken with teachers, engineers, nurses, and business owners who reached six figures. Many of them quietly told me the same surprising sentence that completely changed how I think about money. They said, "Alex, I earn good money now, but somehow I still do not feel rich at all." If that sentence sounds familiar to you, then you are experiencing something millions of Americans are noticing right now. Because somewhere along the way, the meaning of a high salary quietly changed without anyone officially announcing it. Datient. In this video, I want to explore the illusion surrounding six-figure income and why it often feels less powerful today. We will look at real numbers behind housing, transportation, food, healthcare, and everyday expenses shaping modern American life. More importantly, I want to explain why many responsible people still feel financially stuck despite doing everything correctly. If conversations about money, economics, and real cost of living interest you, this channel explores those questions every week. So if you enjoy thoughtful breakdowns like this one, consider subscribing and joining the discussion with people navigating similar challenges. Hikurdi. And while you watch, I would genuinely love to hear your perspective about what income actually feels comfortable today. Because the answer to that question has changed dramatically compared with what previous generations believed about success. To understand why, we first need to examine how the idea of a six-figure salary became such a powerful symbol. Not long ago, earning $100,000 placed someone far above the typical American household income. But today, that same number often sits quietly in the middle of the economic landscape rather than towering above it. To see why this shift happened, we first need to understand what the typical American household actually earns today. According to the most recent data from the United States Census Bureau, median household income in 2024 sits around $83,000. That number alone changes the meaning of six figures, because $100,000 is no longer dramatically above average income. Research from Pew also shows the American middle class now stretches roughly from $56,000 to about $169,000, which means a $100,000 salary often lands almost perfectly in the center of the middle class range. In other words, six figures today does not necessarily represent wealth. It often represents financial stability with limited breathing room. But statistics alone rarely explain why people emotionally feel something has gone wrong with their money. The real moment of realization usually appears quietly during everyday life, rather than while reading economic reports. I remember speaking with a software engineer named Mark, who reached a salary of $108,000. He told me he spent nearly 10 years studying, working late nights, and switching companies to finally reach six figures. When the promotion arrived, Mark believed the financial pressure he carried for years would finally disappear. For a few weeks, the feeling was exciting, because crossing that income milestone still carries psychological weight in America. But within months, the same old worries quietly returned, while his monthly expenses continued climbing higher. Mark showed me a simple list of costs that looked surprisingly similar to millions of other American households. His apartment rent alone cost about $2,400 each month in the city where he worked. His car payment added another $650, not including insurance, fuel, and maintenance expenses. Student loan payments required roughly $400 every month, a reminder of the education needed for his career. Groceries for a normal week averaged around $170, sometimes higher when food prices increased again. Utilities, internet service, and phone bills together quietly consumed another few $100s every single month. When Mark added everything together, he realized much of his six-figure income disappeared before the month ended. That realization is the moment many people pause and ask a simple but uncomfortable question about modern life. If $100,000 is considered a strong salary, why does everyday life still feel financially tight? The answer begins with something economists describe as the changing cost structure of basic living expenses. Over the past 2 decades, essential costs like housing, transportation, food, and healthcare have grown faster than wages. This shift did not happen overnight, which is why many people struggle to notice the change clearly. Instead, it unfolded slowly year after year until ordinary life quietly became far more expensive. Housing is the clearest example because it represents the largest single expense for most American households. According to Federal Reserve housing data, the median monthly mortgage payment reached roughly $2,300 in 2024. That translates to about $27,000 each year simply to maintain a typical home payment. Financial advisors historically recommended spending no more than 30% of income on housing. Yet many households today spend closer to 40%, sometimes even approaching half of their income. For renters, the story is not much easier because housing prices have climbed rapidly across many American cities. Data from Zillow shows the national median rent recently reached about $1,850 monthly. That equals more than $22,000 each year before adding utilities, internet, or renter's insurance. When housing alone consumes such a large portion of income, the remaining budget becomes far more fragile. Though, this is often the first reason 6-figure salaries no longer feel as powerful as they once did. But housing is only the beginning, because another major expense quietly expanded during the same period. Transportation costs in the United States have risen dramatically as vehicles, insurance, and fuel became more expensive. According to the American Automobile Association, owning and operating a vehicle now averages roughly $12,000 annually. For many households, that single number rivals what families once spent on an entire year of groceries. That transportation figure includes fuel, insurance, maintenance, registration, and the hidden cost of depreciation, slowly reducing your vehicle's value. Many people only notice their monthly car payment, yet the true cost of driving extends far beyond that number. Gas prices fluctuate, insurance premiums increase, and routine maintenance quietly drains hundreds of dollars each year. When transportation expenses reach $12,000 annually, they quietly become the second largest household cost after housing. Next comes food, an expense every person encounters almost daily without thinking about long-term totals. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, the average American household spends roughly $9,000 annually on food. That figure reflects normal grocery shopping and occasional meals outside the home rather than luxury dining experiences. Between 2020 and 2024, food prices increased approximately 23% across many categories of everyday groceries. That means families buying the same basic items now spend significantly more money than only a few years ago. Many people interpret this as personal overspending, when in reality the baseline cost of food simply shifted upward. After housing, transportation, and food, the next financial pressure point often appears through healthcare costs. The Kaiser Family Foundation reports that average out-of-pocket healthcare expenses exceed $4,000 annually. And that number assumes individuals already carry health insurance through an employer or private coverage plan. Deductibles, prescription costs, and co-payments can quickly push healthcare spending much higher during unexpected illness. Even a routine emergency room visit can add thousands of dollars to a household budget. These medical expenses create uncertainty because they appear suddenly and rarely arrive at convenient financial moments. After healthcare come the smaller costs people rarely calculate carefully but still pay every single month. Utilities, internet service, mobile phone plans, and household supplies quietly accumulate across the entire year. On average, these everyday services often total around $3,000 annually for many households. None of these expenses feel extreme individually, yet together they reshape the entire financial picture. When you combine these smaller expenses, the total often surprises people who believed their budget was under control. Clothing, personal care products, Cleaning supplies and occasional home maintenance can easily reach several $1,000s each year. Financial planners often estimate these miscellaneous living costs around $5,000 to $6,000 annually. At first, that number sounds manageable, yet it represents another quiet slice of income disappearing every month. Once we place these categories together, the financial picture begins to look very different from expectations. Housing alone averages roughly $25,000 annually for many households across the country. Transportation adds about $12,000 each year simply to maintain a vehicle and daily mobility. Food contributes another $9,000 annually for groceries and occasional restaurant meals. Healthcare expenses typically require around $4,000 each year, even for insured individuals. Utilities, internet service, and phone plans together add approximately $3,000 annually. Miscellaneous necessities such as clothing, supplies, and small repairs contribute another $5,000. When we add those numbers together, basic living costs approach $58,000 to $60,000 annually. And remember, this estimate does not include luxury spending, vacations, or expensive lifestyle choices. These are simply the ordinary costs of functioning as a working adult in modern America. Now we need to compare those expenses with what actually happens to a $100,000 salary. Many people assume earning six figures means they receive $100,000 to spend each year. But taxes change that equation immediately before any rent, groceries, or bills are paid. Federal income tax, state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare contributions significantly reduce take-home income. For many workers earning $100,000, the realistic take-home amount falls near $72,000 annually. Suddenly, the difference between income and expenses begins to look far smaller than people expected. When a $100,000 salary becomes roughly $72,000 after taxes, the financial picture shifts immediately. Now compare that $72,000 of take-home income with the $60,000 of basic expenses. What remains is often a surprisingly narrow margin for savings, emergencies, or building long-term wealth. This small gap explains why many six-figure earners still describe living paycheck to paycheck. It does not necessarily mean they spend recklessly, but rather that modern expenses absorb income quickly. Even a modest, unexpected event, like a medical bill or car repair, can suddenly disrupt the entire budget. When financial stability depends on such a thin margin, stress naturally becomes a constant background feeling. That stress often leads people to assume they must be making mistakes with their personal finances. I have heard many people quietly ask whether they simply failed to manage their money responsibly. But in many cases, the issue is not individual behavior. It is the broader economic environment. Over time, the structure of everyday expenses expanded, while wages increased at a slower pace. This gradual imbalance creates the illusion that individuals are struggling alone with their financial decisions. In reality, millions of households experience the exact same tension between income and rising living costs. When people compare themselves to older generations, the difference becomes even more noticeable. A salary of $100,000 once carried far greater purchasing power than it does today. Decades ago, that income often allowed families to buy homes, raise children, and still save comfortably. Today, the same salary frequently supports only basic stability without significant room for long-term growth. This contrast fuels the feeling that financial progress somehow became more difficult than expected. The truth is that economic conditions quietly evolved while cultural expectations about income remained unchanged. And that gap between expectations and reality sits at the heart of the $100,000 illusion. When expectations remain frozen in the past, modern salaries can feel disappointing even when they are objectively high. Many people grew up hearing that reaching six figures meant they had essentially solved their financial problems. That belief shaped career decisions, education choices, and the long-term goals millions of people pursued. But the economic environment surrounding that promise slowly changed, while the promise itself remained unchanged. Housing prices increased dramatically in many regions, particularly in cities where higher-paying jobs are concentrated. At the same time, healthcare systems grew more expensive, pushing insurance premiums and medical bills upward. Transportation also evolved as vehicles became technologically advanced, but significantly more costly to purchase and maintain. Even everyday necessities like groceries experienced sustained price increases that quietly reshaped household budgets. None of these changes individually seemed catastrophic, which is why the shift often escaped public attention. But together, they gradually redefined what level of income truly feels financially comfortable today. This is why a person earning $90,000 and another earning $110,000 often feel surprisingly similar pressure. Both incomes appear strong on paper, yet both exist inside the same modern cost structure. That structure leaves limited space for wealth building once essential expenses claim their share of income. Many households therefore delay financial milestones that earlier generations achieved at much younger ages. Buying a home, starting a family, or building investment savings now requires greater income stability than before. This shift does not necessarily mean individuals are failing, but rather that the economic ladder changed shape. Some of its rungs moved farther apart, requiring more effort and time to climb upward. Yet public conversation still measures success using numbers that belonged to an earlier economic era. That mismatch fuels the quiet frustration many professionals feel despite working hard and earning respectable salaries. Understanding this broader context is essential before judging personal financial success too harshly. When I began studying these numbers more closely, I realized the issue was not simply higher prices everywhere. The deeper change is that essential expenses now claim a much larger share of income than before. When housing, transportation, healthcare, and food dominate a budget, discretionary freedom naturally becomes much smaller. In earlier decades, many families had meaningful space between necessities and the rest of their income. That extra space allowed people to save, invest, travel occasionally, and still feel financially secure. Today, the margin between income and essential costs often feels far thinner even for disciplined households. This narrow margin also explains why unexpected expenses trigger such strong financial anxiety. A medical bill, car breakdown, or sudden rent increase can quickly absorb what little flexibility remained. When those shocks occur repeatedly over time, the feeling of progress begins to disappear. People may still earn more money than previous generations, yet the emotional experience feels surprisingly similar. This psychological tension is what I call the quiet pressure of modern middle-class life. It is the sense that you are moving forward professionally but standing still financially. Many individuals interpret that feeling as personal failure instead of recognizing the structural changes around them. Yet once we examine the numbers calmly, the pattern becomes much easier to understand. The illusion of the $100,000 salary comes from outdated expectations about purchasing power. We still associate that number with the lifestyle it represented 20 or 30 years ago. But the economic environment surrounding that salary has quietly evolved into something very different. Recognizing this shift can actually bring a surprising sense of clarity and relief, because it reframes financial stress as a systemic challenge rather than a purely personal mistake. And that perspective helps us think more realistically about what financial stability truly requires today. Once we understand this shift clearly, the conversation about income and success begins to look very different. The question is no longer whether $100,000 sounds impressive on paper. The real question becomes how far that income actually stretches within today's economic reality. For some regions with lower housing costs, 6 figures may still provide comfortable financial breathing room. But in many metropolitan areas, that same salary now supports only a modest middle-class lifestyle. This regional difference explains why two people earning identical salaries can experience completely different financial realities. One household might save consistently each month, while another struggles simply to cover ordinary expenses. Understanding these differences helps explain why discussions about income often feel confusing or contradictory. Some people insist 6 figures should feel wealthy, while others describe it as barely sufficient. Both perspectives can be true depending on location, expenses, and personal circumstances. The key lesson is that income numbers alone rarely tell the full story about financial well-being. What truly matters is the relationship between income, living costs, and long-term financial goals. Once that relationship becomes clear, the illusion surrounding certain salary milestones begins to fade. Instead of chasing symbolic numbers, people can focus on building stability within their real environment. That might mean adjusting expectations, planning expenses carefully, or choosing locations with different cost structures. None of these choices are simple, yet understanding the underlying math empowers more thoughtful decisions. And perhaps the most important realization is that feeling financially stretched does not automatically mean personal failure. In many cases, it reflects the broader economic conditions shaping everyday life in modern America. Recognizing that truth can replace frustration with a clearer understanding of the financial landscape. Because once we see the system clearly, we can begin making smarter decisions about money and our future. Coisig.